Welcome back to another episode. We are celebrating the U.S. Marine Corps birthday this week and speaking with SEAC Bryan B. Battaglia. SEAC Battaglia was the second senior enlisted advisor to the chairman, Joint Chief of Staff, and served in the Marine Corps for 35 years. And his personal awards include Legion of Merit, Bronze Star with Combat V, and 1 Gold Star, Purple Heart, and many others, to say the least. SEAC, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Enrique. Thank you.
Well, folks, we are celebrating 247 years of service to our nation. That is no small feat. The Marine Corps has been at the front end of every major battle defending our nation, and we are grateful for them. I'm wearing my Marine Corps lava red shirt today to celebrate. As a seagoing sailor, Navy veteran, I favor the Marine Corps because I'm a Gator sailor, right? LHD 7 USS Iwo Jima was my ship and will forever be my ship. But before we get into all the good stuff around the Marine Corps, SEAC, tell us a little bit about you and your journey in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, well, thanks, and it's a journey it has been, I'll tell you. And even when you just had mentioned Gator freighters, brought back some wonderful memories of those times as an infantry guy deploying so many occasions aboard ship, and the friendships that you make, and the collaboration that you witness so small down at the very low tactical level, both with our sister service, the Navy, and with other nations that you deploy ashore and work with. You don't realize maybe the impact and significance back then as a young, E3, E4 sergeant corporal. But as the memories return now, you think how that person wouldn't be my friend to this day if it weren't for that deployment. And it's just, you can't put a price really on that. So yeah, 247 years we're celebrating this week. As a matter of fact, we take a lot of our tradition off of the British Royal Marines, who recently celebrated their 358th birthday, of course, much older than us. That was October 26th, I believe, 1664, and October 28th. And I did an exchange program with them, and so I have a intimate connection and relationship with that service as well. But it's it may be coincidental that they're so close with the birthdays, and of course we follow on the next day with Veterans Day, which expands out from just that of celebrating the Marine Corps birthday, and goes from a Semper Fidelis to thank you for your service to our nation, both past and present. So as each and every birthday, and all the service branches celebrate their birthday in their own way, although I would probably admit that the Corps probably takes it a step or two further, and it really doesn't matter where you are or how many people are there. You're going to celebrate, whether that be with a shot of your favorite adult beverage, to having a cigar, or having, looking in the mirror and singing the Marines hymn to yourself. There's some way, shape, or form that you celebrate and recognize the Corps' birthday. So a little bit about me. I grew up in a small city suburb of New Orleans called Metairie, in a fabulous Catholic raised American Italian family. And I say that for a reason, and I'll get to that later. After high school, I joined the Marines, like many of us do. We joined the military. College certainly wasn't in the immediate future for me as the next steps in my childhood development. And so a buddy and I joined. We went into the infantry and stayed there in the infantry being assigned to various units and duties for the latter part of 17 years, when the transition from the infantry to a first sergeant, or a kind of a command element leader, took place. And so the first sergeant major route is the route that I chose to take, and that lasted until my retirement from the Pentagon in 2000 and late 2016. I think I finally retired, which was 37 years and some change, 36 years and some change, 8 months or something like that. And I'm not trying to put a number on it to boast or brag. I guess the number is, it happens too fast. It just goes by. You think about it back then, you say, boy, I wish I was 30 again, but it really, really goes by so very fast. The things that you and I have done throughout our military service, from schools to events to operations to learning to being educated and develop. I mean, Lord have mercy. I'm just thankful each and every day, not just to our Lord for being here on earth, but to the United States government for having the opportunity to serve our country. So that's Bryan Battaglia's story in a nutshell.
Well, yeah, that was a very tight nutshell, because I know you have such vast experience. I have mentioned earlier 35, 36, 37. Still, I mean, once you go past 30, that's a long time.
It sure is.
We were so fortunate to have you at the head there. Number two, I mentioned as we introduced the podcast, what a great position. And we were talking previously to this, to have a multi-force senior enlisted advisor, where and there's not any direct, you get this turn, you get that turn, whoever gets it at the time gets it. But to while I was in service and we met in Hawaii at the time, Fleet Marco Ramirez was there. Fleet Mark Rudes was at Indo Pac, and it was just nice to see a person in a different uniform. Now, obviously, I'm likened to the Marine Corps because of my history there with Gators.
Sure.
But to see someone else in a different uniform leading, the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs, advising at that level, was such a nice thing to see. Purple, joint forces is one of the best environments that we could ever have. We learn so much from each other. And as you're learning and as you were growing from infantry to your latter years at SEAC, what pivotal leadership moments did you learn the most from while serving?
Well, I could initially start this conversation off with a leadership moment. The standard was high, and it's high for a reason. And then when I found myself being promoted or implanted into leadership positions at various levels, squad, platoon, company, it was obviously now my responsibility, as well as any other leader in uniform, to have an obligation to keep that standard high, not necessarily higher, but high. And it's all for a reason. And it comes down to, I think, readiness and discipline. Another leadership moment I had that sort of sticks out at me is that not every order or policy that comes from our higher echelon we may totally agree with, have total buy-in. And there may be reasons for that. We may not see the entire picture. Nonetheless, it's in order and it's a policy. We're expected to follow it as well as enforce it. But it's really a defining moment in our career at that juncture as to how you're going to grasp that policy and either sell it or just sort of go through the motions to avoid conflict or confrontation. But it defines your mettle and your intestinal fortitude when a policy in order, and pick a policy in order across the years that took place that you may have not totally agreed with, and I don't want to say it's a test of loyalty per se, because as you move in senior levels of leadership, there's an expectation that you are going to, in a way, challenge authority if you feel there's some, ethical or moral shortfall. That's for the senior leadership levels, I think, to necessarily get involved in. But it's a moment that really stuck out to me because I didn't, and in part, I didn't have the entire picture. And so it caused myself to question the order and the policy. Once I understood it, the buy-in comes much easier. We almost had it flipped backwards, where we didn't advertise it and socialize it before we implemented it. And then another moment, or just one more moment I'll give you, is going back to the basics. It's a term that I really started hearing as SEAC, and that's one thing I had buy-in, because I seen things in the across the armed forces that we were falling short of the mark, and you relate back to our earlier days in the service to say we wouldn't have a problem with this at all. What is the problem? Well, it's we've lost that basic, and part of the loss was that some of the older generation of leadership wasn't attuned to the, let's say, technology-driven soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen, and Coast Guardsmen, and National Guardsmen. And so there was a hit and miss there, and it's back to the basics. While it was a catchy phrase, it was also incomplete, and I don't think it was a total problem solver that we were really in need of or looking for. Now, this was sort of at the height or initial decline in Iraq and Afghanistan, and coming back to a garrison type environment where a large adjustment to navigate that lifestyle again, because there were no more deployments until we hit our next conflict. So my office sort of got together, we brainstormed this with some other peers, and we developed this. It's not necessarily back to the basics, but rather bridging the basics. And it's the bridge of the basics between an older generation where things may still apply and work, to a new generation where we are not completely savvy with or how to engage or relate to. And it's bridging both of those to today's joint force. And it seemed to work and catch on. But I just felt ourselves taking a step back if we completely went back, tried to go back to the basics, where some things, as you know, Enrique, just weren't going to, didn't apply anymore in today's world in military. Sorry for being so long-winded, but bridging the basics is a concept and a leadership moment that I recall very fondly as my last office.
No, and I appreciate that. I remember Brilliant on the Basics very well when I was still in, Mick Paul Stevens, that was his,
Right.
charge to the mess as we, led sailors. And there is a very important factor in that. You can't just ditch basics, because it is foundational, right?
Absolutely.
But you are right. You have to apply common day, nowadays type of approaches and bridge those two. So great, moments there that anyone could actually learn from. And one of the areas was that you mentioned making clear the vision, right? Making clear that what you want from your force. Sometimes you don't get all the backstory,
Sure.
and it turns it turns into a challenge sometimes, and you have to develop a how do I implement, how do I deliver this. We used to call it something else. How do we deliver this and make it still
Right.
eatable, right? And we came up with some interesting approaches of that. But thank you for sharing those three, very pivotal indeed. um when we're looking at impact, right, and as leaders, typically that's where we get our biggest bang for the buck. How do you impact? How do you influence? So, who was instrumental and impactful that impacted you while you was in the military?
Oh my Lord. Well, that list is truly long. However, I would say that it's a very nice plug or segue to say there have been people who have impacted, mainly positive, throughout my career, very instrumental, that were junior to me, as well as peers and obviously seniors. My father was very instrumental in my life, not only in the Corps, but before the Corps as well. And even though he's passed, I still talk to him and, solicit that sort of advice that you do with a passing parent. But the list would be long, and I would probably shortchange someone by not mentioning them if I tried to name everybody right now. I would I would also suggest to any one of your listeners, if they're seeking some leadership development, that folks like you and I, and the higher you get, the more applicable it may become. Self-evaluation is extremely important, and you can always try to evaluate your own leadership of how effective you are and put a number on it, but how accurate really is that? I had back in my younger days taken a classroom full of corporals and sergeants. This was when I was a first sergeant in E8, and they were very attuned to me as I was their company leader. And I just asked them, this was all anonymous now, because if it's not anonymous, then there's some fear of retribution, there's some, fear of retaliation type of thing that's going to affect the true value, to write me out a report, an evaluation report, as we have the responsibilities to write the evals on our juniors. And they did, and I asked for their honest opinion, and it was a nice wake up call for me. There were some things that I had identified or didn't identify, or could have done differently, that reached out to them. Again, it's bridging the basics, and I found it to be very, very effective. Nothing happened to once that was over with, that small little exercise, it was a tool for me to better the command, not necessarily just to better me. But I would suggest that to any leader growing up, that every once in a while, periodically, you use your junior folks, your subordinates, to help evaluate where you're going, because they're certainly going to see some things that you just don't. And then we're probably talking about role models, although we had said that, that exact term, and what an important part of life, both for in the military and out of it, for success and survival. And we stress that very large throughout the armed forces. Enrique, I'm sure you've had a slew of role models yourself. I still use them to this day, and they're, while they're not used daily, I can rely on them to give me a true and unvarnished opinion of where I'm heading with something or a decision I certainly am required to make. And they have proven their worth in gold. Um, and this is not gender based. This is not religious denomination based, or even specialty or MOS based. It's someone who I feel as a role model that I want to be like when I get to be their age and experience. And and again, my father was one of those from the early ages of teaching me resiliency through today. So yeah, I can't overemphasize the importance of role models in our lives, both in and out of the military.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned in that last part there, my mind immediately goes to Mick Pond, Dwayne Bushy, and Jim Hurt. They have been such a blessing in my life. Thank you, gentlemen, if you're listening. And I have another handful of others that have been so instrumental.
Absolutely.
So yes, I totally agree with that. Now, we was mentioning earlier that bridging of basics with technology. There's a lot of thought around where we are as a force, where we were, where we are, and where we're headed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to ask you about your thoughts regarding the future of the Marine Corps.
Well, let me make a disclaimer that probably during this part of our conversation, I'm going to expand out beyond just out of the Corps as well. And it's, by default, just the exposure that I've had with the other service branches. I think in the end, the Corps will be just fine. And we, as a nation, if you keep tabs on military information, let's say, the media can really put a narrative or a spin from slinging mud to a good news story, all in one sentence. So we have to be very careful where we get our information from. We also, these surveys taken that may, again, it's the narrative that may have three people take the survey, two say yes and one say no, and it's 75% of this, want the yes. So it's really misinformation of what you might hear. Anyway, the Corps is going through change, as well as the other service branches as well, and we find that not solely because of the administration that happens to be in office as our civilian leadership. Other factors take place, Enrique, like post-war or conflict, forces change upon the military, whether that be increase or decrease, and normally it's a decrease in adjustment of troop levels and equipment. Budgetary constraints certainly bring up a factor in the future of name the service. And one other one that probably leads to, I'll think of that in a minute. Recruiting seems to have hit the media circuit in more of a negative connotation than a positive one. We've always been challenged with recruiting. It's a challenging field, right? And we all know that there's a significant percentage of the American youth of 18 to 24 that doesn't necessarily fully qualify to join the military. That's why we have waivers. And you apply the waiver, it doesn't make the young kid less than fully qualified per se, because they are looking for direction and guidance. And so if they meet that criteria by our standard, then I think it's initially become a win-win. Recruiters in the Corps, for that matter, don't get credit for that recruit until they graduate boot camp. So they can sign up to their heart's content, but the official, ruling of you got credit for that signature is when they pass boot camp. So the onus goes on the recruiter to prepare that young man or woman for boot camp and meeting that high standard. There'll always be an attrition rate, that there has to be, but that's one thought of the Corps' future is the recruiting. I hope the criteria to join the Marines doesn't lessen. We have been a very, very proud service, not to boast or brag, but to set perhaps a standard with the other service branches of the high percentage of high school graduates that we have joining instead of less than high school. Back when you and I joined, 10th grade was good enough. And maybe older than our generation, it was less than that. It required a small waiver, but it was a simple check in the box. Because at that point in time, the philosophy of serving was what to think, not how to think. That's what we were looking to brew, right? And in the Marines, and specific only to the Marines, when someone joined on a 4-year contract, that whole conglomerate of the recruiting pool, when 75% of those got out after their 4-year enlistment, that was a success story for us. The Corps is a young man's game or young woman's game too, and so we know not everyone's gonna stay in, and the 25% moved on to the NCO and staff and CO ranks and what have you. But I hope the criteria doesn't join. These are my two takeaways. In that I'm very proud of the high school graduate percentage that we have joining, because it really takes a smarter young man or woman to maneuver and navigate the successes of military service, especially in the Marines, of how physical and demanding it can be. And that, if someone's interested, don't buy off and drink the Kool-Aid of what you may see in the media about recruiting and the problems thereof.
Yeah, that you mentioning that process of hey, you don't get the credit. I'm over here like, whoa, what? That's talk about a salesman's nightmare. Imagine if you're having to do that out in the common civilian population, and every time that you brought somebody in, you only get credit for them if they stay a year in the company, right? That's that would be something equivalent. No, I love that, and yeah, I am of the same thought. The future, is just as we were thinking in the past, right? They're going to be all right. They're going to be all right. Things will always normalize in a military setting, because when we separate that group, when we were separated from, I almost say separated from the world, but that's really what it was, into and ingested into this new world. There is a difference in the thought pattern, difference in the way you approach things, and you learn better ways. You learn more concrete ways, but not only for the benefit of self, but obviously for the benefit of team, and that takes center stage. The team mentality is the foundational floor for everything we do, and that's why they will be just
totally
fine.
Agree.
Yeah,
totally
yeah,
agree.
they'll do great. And that goes for all the services. Now we have a newer service, the Space Force, and they're going through their own milestones
Sure.
and growing pains. but they will also be great. I'm looking forward to a lot of things coming out of that particular service. Now, you learned a lot of things throughout your 36 years and change in service. What pearls of wisdom did you learn at those, through that career that you would like to share with the listening audience?
Um, this comment may also be applicable to the last part of the discussion we just had. Not necessarily some pearl of wisdom, but perhaps it is for leadership. The challenges that we've had in recruiting, some of the challenges with the biggest employment agency in the entire country, of course, the DoD, has led, and this is not new. This has been going on for some time. Has led think tanks and veteran service organizations, not to name any here publicly, about bringing back the draft, and that is, the answer to taking care of our military and returning it to a degree of readiness that one thinks we're not at, or the recruiting shortfalls and getting the numbers up. And then it will also take care of America's youth problem that we seem to have with obesity and what have you. I'm against that thought and concept. We've obviously tried that before. Back in July of '74 is when we sort of officially went to an all-volunteer force, and it's been that way since. It's worked for us just fine, but it does place a large amount of stress, if you will, on the recruiting force. But what you get in the end is someone who wants to be there, not has to be there. We've learned some valuable lessons with having the draft, and the draft showed that we wasn't prepared. So until someone can convince me otherwise, and I was approached with this while still in the Pentagon, and so I've not changed my opinion at all. I don't believe the draft, or compulsory service, should I say, is the answer to answering any sort of temporary shortfalls that we may have with personnel readiness or strength. For your listeners, Enrique, who may want to consider joining the military, which is a great career, man. It just opens up so many opportunities for you for the rest of your life. And I see that more now as a veteran and retiree than I did while I was still serving. For example, when I'll reach out to a veteran here locally, and someone who's having a problem here locally, let's say some mental issues, and I ask that individual, "Are you a veteran, perhaps?" And they say no. It limits choices, it limits options, it limits avenues that he or she can go through, or I can help them find a resource for. It just limits them, right? Not that they're going to get inadequate service, but compared to their civilian counterpart, if they had served, there's so many more, and the VA is probably the big 800-pound gorilla. But if anyone of your listening community is thinking about joining, or their son, daughter, grandchild, one little tidbit that I tried to follow along the course of my career was to do my job to the best of my ability and to follow orders. And it didn't matter whether the job was, now look, we're talking about a Louisiana high school education here, so I wasn't the smartest cookie in the jar, and I always, I never always got it right. But if the job may have contained a working party doing a resupply aboard the ship, the vert rep or the unrep, and you're in a line heaving and hauling groceries and goods and dry goods, you do it to the best of your ability. It's got nothing to do necessarily with your infantry skills and tactics. but it's there for survival, and it's the team, as you mentioned earlier. So the job can come in many forms and fashions. That's just doing it to the best of your ability. Following orders will keep you out of trouble, of course. And not that our services have a zero defect mentality, but leadership is only going to put up with so much before you really bring the wrong kind of attention to yourself, and find that your career is being limited. I also found, call it a pearl, but if you feel that you're an asset to your work section, to your command, to your unit, to your ship, then your complaints will never outweigh your corrective actions. And said another way, you can find yourself bitching, moaning, groaning at something that you really don't feel like doing, or a problem that may be identified. And we would rather have you be part of the solution and not the problem by continuing the bitching and the moaning and groaning. So it's the old put up or shut up, and be part of the solution. Now this is specific just to the Corps, but I think the other service branches use them in a, just said a different way. We have 14 leadership traits and 11 leadership principles that are very near and dear to our heart. And anyone who follows those, regardless of uniform color and branch, can greatly assist in their success in leadership, because it's a dynamic that can become very complex and difficult with time and seriousness of problem solving. But these leadership and principles that we all learn as Marine leaders growing up are like the 10 commandments to a religious leader in the Vatican. And I'm not trying to downplay the 10 commandments, but that's how important that they are, that we use, and not just one at a time, but and constantly throughout our career. Those traits and principles help me to this day, and it really keeps you on the straight and narrow if you follow them honestly and true. I also think, Enrique, that every command, every section, every ship needs some sort of resiliency framework to succeed, longevity and success. That really came to me, and just hit me square in the forehead when I went to the Pentagon, and Admiral Mullen, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs then, we had met a couple of times. He is the sort of the grandfather of this total force fitness. And that's a framework that's designed to apply to every one of the service branches, National Guard included, that will apply to mind, body, and spirit, and assist coping, problem solving, problem prevention, injury recovery. The list goes on and on. I'm sure you've heard of the resiliency models that the services have. Huge believer in it. So the Admiral sat me down, this was before I became the SEAC, and explained to me he wants to get this Department of Defense instructions signed before he leaves office, and he needs a champion for it. I looked it over, I read it, I applied it to myself, and the eye opener for me is I didn't realize how unfit I was, having multiple tours overseas, and just going through the stresses of military service. Using that model, I really found myself to be more unfit than I was happy with. There was no way I was at 100% operating levels, and so the total force fitness sort of took off. The service branches resisted a bit, but then I think understood the mind, body, and spirit concept and how it could help things like suicide, sexual assault, financial trouble, and things like that. So Total Force Fitness, a big believer in it still to this day, and I hope it's very, very active in the Department of Defense even after I left. That's a mega pearl of wisdom that I would share with anybody, because recruits were learning it while they were still in basic training. And then I would tell you also lastly, as the non-commissioned officer and petty officer, coupled with the company grade officer, are still the center of gravity in our armed forces. It's not lower than that. It's not the colonels and the Navy captains. It's that community right there, the mid-level line leadership that makes it happen, ensures it's done, and are the ones got their hands out for the next mission to come. The non-commissioned officer, petty officer, and company grade officers. That's my story, Bubba, and I'm sticking to it.
And I believe it, and I support it as well. There are a lot of things that you could share leadership wise that can help somebody down the road.
Absolutely.
Resiliency has undoubtedly been at the forefront of all of we've done in the last 3 years. And I think that the majority of us that did come up under Admiral Mullen and that model were able to not only go through these periods, but also maintain our health, right? Overall holistic health.
Yes.
Through this last 3 years, and all thanks to that military setting that absorbed that and said, you know what, it's just something that we can actually march forward with. Let's implement it. And I am definitely thankful for having that in my toolbox for the last 3 years. Now, there's a lot of conversation that we've had around recruiting, things in of that nature, because it has been a challenge. But there are a lot of young men and women that may be listening and are getting ready to make that final decision, or considering entering the service, and you, SEAC, as an overall arching senior enlisted advisor, can obviously speak to all of those young men and women that are going into any other services. But what leadership tip or advice would you give them as they're considering coming in?
Well, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, but I would be careful with listening to what you see and read on social media, and those sound bites that tend to sensationalize a negative narrative. This is, your life that you're talking about, and there's opportunity once high school has been completed, or college, has been finished, or you use the armed forces to complete your college. It's one of the many benefits that you can earn, let's say, should you have the desire to serve in uniform. We know the days, although there may be a few and far between, we know the days of coming in for the complete patriotism and service to my country because I owe it to them, may have minimized and flattened out. And there are a plethora of reasons why the young of today want to join the military, and so you have to satisfy this need, right? Not necessarily what's in it for me, but what can I get out of it? Just so much significant opportunity for anyone who serves. And I'm not going to be biased just to the Corps, but I would tell you that I envy the way the Air Force has used its enlisted promotion system and connected it into college progression. That if you're not at this stage in your college studies and graduation, you're not getting promoted, and use it as a forcing function, which you would hope that it didn't have to be that way, but it it forces upon the importance of education and how valuable that they don't realize at the time you're going to need that on the outside. Nowadays out here in this world, the bachelor's degree is really the new high school diploma in many ways. And so you find yourself at the back of the line, getting on a ladder, trying to look over the crowd if you got a high school diploma, and you think that's okay because we're still selling it. And in some cases, it's not. Now, there's only about, I think, 11% maybe. My data may be a little dated, but 11%, 17% of folks who join wind up staying at 20 years. There was a very, very high percentage. So that 89% who wind up getting out after 4 years, you can use that 4 years to really prepare yourself. At the same time, you're serving your country for a bigger and greater world, and you will depart the military, again, any service, so much more prepared, educated, directed, leader developed, skilled, specialized than your civilian counterpart who got out of high school and just went into a job. If you think losing 4 years of time that you could have worked in a job, you can catch that up in a heartbeat, because you'll find that once you get into an institution or some sort of industry, because of your military service, will cause you to advance more quickly than those who didn't serve. This 4 years goes by pretty fast, and while we would all love to stay in, perhaps that's not going to be possible. But the military did right and just for us, because I think we wanted it to, and we worked at it. We didn't lay around and expect it to come to us. We went and grabbed it, and that's got to be part of the success too. So the initiative that our DoD teaches individuals to get hungry for, make an assessment, make a decision, and go get it, is something that is very lacking in our civilian world of employment, and that's why we see it here. So many civilian employers begging for the military veteran to come work for them.
Yeah, absolutely true. Folks, if you're considering service to your nation, any one of the services will gladly facilitate that. And you will not regret, I know I don't regret any day that I spent in the service. As you mentioned, SEAC, it was very good for me and for yourself. It gave you what you went for. And I was fortunate, and you were blessed to get to the height in your career as well, because we were able to do that. Now, if SEAC, if someone is listening, would like to get a hold of you, what would be the preferred method that you would give?
Well, you get the spelling of my last name right, and you can look me up on both Facebook and LinkedIn. I frequent more on LinkedIn than I do on Facebook, but that's a quick reach, and yeah, any advice I can certainly offer, the pros and cons of serving in the military and what it can do for an individual. I'd be more than happy to share.
All right, folks. Well, I'm going to make sure to have that as part of the video and show notes. SEAC, it's been a pleasure to speak to you this morning. See you again after so many years. It's almost been 7 years since I last saw you, but such a pleasure. Folks, I just want to remind everybody that today's episode is sponsored by Triad Leadership Solutions. If you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to subscribe and let us know by leaving a comment right now. And we're always looking for new ideas and guests that we can add to the show. So if you know someone or have a topic that you would like featured on the podcast or want to sponsor our show, we'd love to hear about it by emailing us at triadleadershipsolutions@gmail.com. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you. Happy birthday, Marine Corps. You guys are great.